بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome everybody. Welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome you. Very pleased to welcome you here to Doha. Very pleased to welcome you here as we convene the sixth annual meeting of the Asian Association of World Historians. It's the first time we've had such a conference in Doha, and we're proud to welcome you here to the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies, which is quickly establishing itself as the principal site of academic engagement, exploration on a global level here in Doha. My name is Fahad Bshara. I'm an associate professor of history here at the Doha Institute and also a historian of the Indian Ocean world. I have the honor of introducing our speakers for today, but before I do that, I want to give a quick word of thanks to the people who helped organize this conference. The AAWH Secretary General, Subir Dey, who tirelessly worked on this conference from its beginning to its end, and really, day and night, is deserving of all of our gratitude. The entire AAWH Board of Directors who stepped in at different moments and gave clear guidance to us all, so thank you to the Board of Directors. And of course, and we'll be repeating these thanks throughout the day, to the Doha Institute team, the team behind all of this, especially Ismail Atiya and Zinat Hassan, who worked to make all of this possible and continue actually to make work to make all of this possible. If everything goes right today and tomorrow, it's because of them. If anything goes wrong today and tomorrow, I guarantee you it's because of me. So, nobody came to hear me speak. At least I don't think anybody came to hear me speak. I'm pretty sure. I'm told there's a video, and I will try to. There we go. There we are.
Welcome to the 6th conference of the Asian Association of World Historians, hosted by the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies as it celebrates its 10th anniversary. The history of Asia is the history of the world, of ideas, encounters, and goods that have shaped civilizations. From these interconnected histories emerges the Gulf as one of Asia's most dynamic and vital regions. From ancient trade routes to contemporary nodal economies, the Gulf remains a crossroads where commerce, culture, and geopolitics converge.
There'll be lots of opportunity for applause, I'm sure. I have the honor of introducing the speakers for this opening session. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Abdul Wahab Al-Effendi, who is the president and provost of the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Dr. Abdul Wahab has held this role since 2020. He joined DI in 2015 as professor of politics and the head of politics and international relations program, and later served as the dean of the School of Social Sciences and Humanities. So you see there's a lot of upward mobility here at this institution. His publications include Genocidal Nightmares, Narratives of Insecurity and the Logic of Mass Atrocities, published in 2015. The Muslim Intellectual and Arab Maladies, Reflections on the Contemporary Predicament, Doha Forum of Arab International Relations, 2022, published in Arabic. and the editor of the volume forthcoming in 2026, Beyond the Populist Moment, Perspectives on Democracy's Crisis. Please join me in welcoming our colleague, President and Provost, Dr. Abdul Wahab.
Thank you, Fahad. Our dear guests from the Asian Association for Global History, our guests here from Qatar, colleagues and students. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this important event where we host this conference on Gulf history and global history by the association. And I think this is the first time this is hosted in this region, so it's a great honor. And I think also this is probably the first time we host an Asian conference, which I have an impression that it's also I would like to add that I have an impression that there is a difficulty in which we see Asian identity crystallized, I think, unless in football. I might be wrong, so correct me. Even I see the association has some reservation about this because they call themselves the Asian Association for Global History, so not for Asian history. So maybe this is one of two things. Either this is an admission that it's very difficult to have something Asian, or maybe, as probably I heard Dr. Amal hint, because Asia, they think Asia is the world, which is also very interesting. In any case, I think there is a plausibility in thinking that Asia is the world, because I think historically it's the first historical entities have existed in this continent. Of course, we Africans maybe have been before you, but we'll forgive that for the moment. But I've been working on a book on Sudanese identity for a while, and I think it's going to be a historical book, not only because it delves in history, but because I've been working on it for about 2 decades. So it became history. But I would like to stop at a poem which was written by a Sudanese gentleman, intellectual. At that time, he was when he did this, he was still a young schoolboy in the 1956. The poem is called Asia and Africa, and it was written shortly after the Bandung conference. So at that time, there was this idea of celebrating Asian African identity, and this guy is also interesting for another thing, because I think he's the only person maybe in the world who had studied in the Islamic University of Al-Azhar in Arabic language, and went to do his postgraduate studies in the Maxim Gorky Institute in Moscow. So he's interesting. And he wrote this article, as I said, in the schedule of the Bandung conference, and it became famous because also an important singer in Sudan has made it into a song, which was very popular. Although he has written it into classical Arabic, which is not usually the songs in Sudan are written, but it was very beautiful, and very beautiful sang it became very popular. The poem starts by saying, I'm going to sing the last stanza for the blue shadows in the forests of Kenya and Malaya, for my comrades in the Asian lands, for Malaya are for young and loyal Bandung, for the leafy nights of joy in New China, for which I sing 1,000 poems in my heart. The poem mentions Algeria, which was at that time its war of liberation, Indonesia, Kenya, which is the farthest he went into sub-Saharan Africa. He was talking more about Asian countries than African countries. He has also left a whole stanza for Egypt, the country of Nasser, and he calls it my country's closest sister, the mother of Jamal Abdel Nasser. And he links it to India, Gandhi's and Tagore's India, and of course Damascus. And he says that we are going to liberate, drive the enemies out of the Night Valley with the help of friendly hands from India and China. So I stand at this point because at that time this was an understanding even in Sudan about Asian African identity as a rising collective against colonialism. But even here, I think the Asian Africa, the Afro-Asian, as they used to call it, did not last for long because it became an allied movement soon, and then it became the third world. But anyway, I think probably, if I may end here, the difficulty of having an Asian identity may be due to the fact that Asia has been historically established, has a number of cultural giants in it. You have Japan, you have China, you have India, you have Persia, then you come here to the Arab world, and it's historical. So I think each side of these things, they are the world. So they do not want to be part of a shared identity with mere mortals. But anyway, thank you very much. And I think maybe the association should tune its reservation a little bit and call it Asian history. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdul-Wahab. Next, I have the honor of presenting or introducing Professor Sucheta Mahajan. Professor Mahajan is known to all of you as the president of the Asian Association of World Historians. She is also Professor Emerita at the Center for Historical Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Her significant books include Independence and Partition, The Erosion of Colonial Power in India, and also India's Struggle for Independence, RSS, School Text, The Murder of Mahatma Gandhi, The Hindu Communal Project, and Education and Social Change, MVF, and Child Labor. Her fields of interest span the short and long history of the 20th century. There's no medium history of the 20th century. It's only long or short. You have to choose one. And including its politics, political economy, and social change. Welcome, Professor Mahajan, and the podium is yours.
Thank you very much. the President and Amal and all the distinguished members of the Asian Association who have come from very long distances to be part of the 6th International Conference. As president of the Asian Association of World Historians, I would like to thank wholeheartedly the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies and especially its very distinguished director, Amal, for collaborating with us in holding this 6th International Conference. Some of you may not know that for a typically this conference, international conference, which is held every 3 years, for the first decade or more, it was held primarily in East Asia. And the holding of the conference this year at Doha, in Qatar, in the Gulf, in West Asia, and earlier 3 years ago in New Delhi, in India, in South Asia, now makes the association truly pan-Asian. I think today we've come, the wheel has come full circle and we can feel Akita-san, the founder members here. And I think, Akita, this is a very important historic moment for us. I was going to speak on something else, but I'm tempted to take up what the president said about his remarks on Asian history and maybe this thing. To clarify that we at the association, what do we mean by world history? It's not that we mean something, it's not about Asian history in terms of its scope. Why we use the word world history even when we study Asian history. It's an approach. So let me just take up one subject, the partition of India, to give you an idea about how does the understanding of an event like that change when we look at it from a comparative or a global approach or a world history approach. Now, when I study the partition of India, if I look at it from the point of view of India alone, I will have a certain understanding of it. I will understand it in terms of the policies of the British in India. I will understand it in terms of the social divisions in India, etc., etc. However, if we apply the world history approach to this, then whether it's India or whether it's Palestine, closer home here, these breakups that happened at the end of empire, they then are not particular to that country or colony, but they can be traced back, for example, in the case of India, to what happened in earlier colonies, such as Ireland. And there's a lot of interesting work on this, beginning with T.G. Fraser, Joe Cleary looking at literature, and of course, more lately, Kate O'Malley with a very interesting piece called, and from the name you can make out, India's Ulsterization. So how India is being looked at by the British in the context of Ireland. The imperial power, in this case Britain, viewed Indian history as one marked by a religious divide. Furthermore, the policies of the colonial state, what we call divide and rule, perpetuated a false division up to the country's partition. The decision of the British administrators to partition India, and just 1 year later, to repeat that disastrous process in Palestine, was rooted in their earlier experience in Ireland. The British perspective on conflict in Palestine, and in fact, even if we go back to the administration of the Mandate, they were rooted again in their earlier colonial experience, notably in Ireland. The historical continuity between Irish and Indian policy on partition is evident. Some of the principles from the British side were the same: Austen Chamberlain and Lord Birkenhead. Then the Anglo-Irish Treaty served as the drawing board for designing post-war frameworks within which the empire was to be dismantled. Another example was that of British officials, including Lord Mountbatten, whom we all know as the last Viceroy of India, who looked to Ireland as a precedent for handling challenges and formulating strategies. Last but not least was something which I have discussed in my book, Independence and Partition, the emergence of what I have called the Commonwealth solution to post-imperial strategic interests, where the strategic interests of the metropolis, that is Britain, were sought to be maintained by retaining ex-colonies in the Commonwealth. Ireland again provided the template. Some scholars more recently have examined the historical context of the partitions in Ireland, India, but in addition, Cyprus and Palestine, contrasting them with the situation in Bosnia. I have Radha Kumar here in mind. Partition in this understanding comes across as a strategy of both territorial control and rapid disengagement from colonies. I'm just asking you to pay attention to a term which is used. We are familiar with the term divide and rule, but there's also a term which sums this up, namely divide and quit. So that's also, together. It was the term used by senior British officials, such as Pendrell Moon, to describe the strategy for partitioning the Indian subcontinent. Now, typically, the populations, whether in India or even in Palestine, were mixed populations. And the decision to partition was not only a response to the demand for self-partition, self-determination, a demand that was interestingly nurtured by the colonial state itself. That is, in India, you have the Muslim League coming up with the two-nation theory and demanding Pakistan. But they would never have got it had it not been for the colonial policy of encouraging the Muslim League and deciding to divide and quit. Partition can be understood as the colonial powers like Britain seeking to withdraw quickly from the mess that they themselves had created. This is very important. For example, within a few weeks of partition, India and Pakistan were involved in a war in Kashmir in 1947-48. This worked in a limited way from the point of view of the imperial power for making a speedy exit. A divided India and a pliant Pakistan, which was then, in a sense, handed over in a certain way to the Americans, suited both Britain and other Western powers during the Cold War. For world historians, the Palestine partition, if looked at in this way, is not an aberration. It was a long-standing imperial modus operandi. Historians focusing on any one colony alone often overlook the fact that the partition had been planned for a long time. The haste with which the last days of colonial rule were wrapped in India as in Palestine was convenient for the departing imperial power in giving the impression that they were not responsible for the violence that was taking place. So in this way, the global image and prestige of Britain in the long term was protected. So the imperial power comes across as being overwhelmed by the forces of violence which, who has let them loose? The masses of people. And why have they let them loose? Because there is the so-called irreconcilable divide between the communities going back. So it's all window dressed in this way. Today, within the rubric or approach of world history, various themes are being studied, from migrations to gender, economy, trade. The histories of empire and colonialism are connected with the South for obvious reasons. But given that it was mainly the North that colonized the South, the connections are global. And in some way, these histories did not end with the liberation movements in the 20th century. Unequal exchange and exploitation have taken other directions and turns in the 21st century, in the global village, as we like to call it today. With this short introduction to world history approach, which I hope answers in some way what our president of the Doha Institute raised the questions about, why not Asian history. Sir, we also study Asian history from the standpoint of world history, and the two are mutually connected. Let me welcome you once again to the 6th International Conference of the Asian Association of World Historians at Doha. Join us as we engage with these critical narratives and shape the future of historical discourse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mahajan, for such a stimulating talk. Last but not least, I'm honored to introduce my colleague and my dean, Professor Amal Ghazal. Amal Ghazal is the dean and professor of history in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities here at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. She received her bachelor's degree from the American University of Beirut and her MA and PhD in history from the University of Alberta in Canada. Professor Ghazal specializes in modern Arab intellectual history. She is the author of Islamic Reform and Arab Nationalism, Expanding the Crescent from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, 1880s to 1930s, but also the author of several articles on Arab intellectual history in the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean worlds. Professor Ghazal has received several grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the Gerda Henkel Foundation Research Scholarship, and I'm going to struggle with this one, the Institut d'études avancées de Nantes Fellowship. That was a lot. Professor Ghazal will be sharing a paper with us, Reclaiming the Margins, the Gulf and the Making of Modern History. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ghazal.
Thank you, Fahad, and thank you all for being with us today, especially those who had to travel long distance. It's a pleasure to be hosting this conference at the Doha Institute. And again, I thank everybody involved, starting with the president, who gave us full support to host this conference, including faculty who supported us. Thanks, Fahad, for being on the committee, on the program committee, and big thanks to the team of the association. Subir, I know you worked relentlessly, and the team here at the Doha Institute, our own staff at the school, including Zinat, Ismail, Baha, and others, but also the staff of the communications office at the Doha Institute, Omar, Yusuf, Salem, and we have Ismail from the studio as well. So many talents came together to put this conference together, so I thank them all. Um, it is our pleasure to host you here at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, and it's an honor to deliver the inaugural keynote of this conference. As a specialist in modern Arab history who has written on several aspects of Gulf history, and also as an administrator at an academic institution in the region who has witnessed firsthand the remarkable growth of the Gulf's academic landscape, I would like to take this opportunity to reflect on the place of the Gulf, the core theme of our gathering, both in our historiography and in light of the region's ongoing transformations. As scholars of modern history, we're called to consider how the Gulf has been represented, imagined, and theorized within broader narratives of empire, modernity, state formation, and globalization. At the same time, the profound social, economic, and intellectual changes unfolding across the Gulf compel us to revisit these narratives, to ask how new realities of connectivity, cultural production, and geopolitical influence are reshaping both the region itself and the ways we study and teach its past. It is fitting that this conversation is taking place here in Doha, a city long positioned at the crossroads of trade and exchange, and increasingly of knowledge, art, and global politics. Doha today stands as both a symbol and a site of the Gulf's engagement with the wider region and the world, embodying the historical continuities of connection, circulation, and transformation that have long defined this part of the globe. We also meet at a moment when the Gulf is everywhere, in the global economy, in the flows of culture and capital, in the circuits of higher education and knowledge production, and in the shifting geopolitics of energy and power. Yet this visibility also invites reflection. What does it mean to study the Gulf at a time when it has become both a global actor and a subject of a global scrutiny? How might its histories of mobility, empire, and exchange help us rethink broader narratives of imperialism, modernity, sovereignty, nation-state, and globalization? In the grand narratives of modern history, the Gulf has long been nowhere, or at least situated, or had been nowhere, or at best situated at the margins of history. Until quite recently, it appeared as a near blank space on the historical map, a zone at the peripheries of empires, whether British or Ottoman or French, and at the edges of what were seen as the real theaters of power reform and transformation, India, the Levant, Egypt, or Europe. When it did appear, it was a desert of tribes, a naval station, or a site of extraction, a side story, an appendage to someone else's history. But as a new scholarship began to recover the Gulf as part of the making of modern history, drawing on fresh methodologies and previously overlooked archives, the aim has not been merely to add another region to the map. It was to question how that map itself has been drawn, to ask how modern history was constructed through acts of inclusion and exclusion that rendered some regions engines of progress and change and other static backwaters. The marginalization of the Gulf in historiography was not accidental. It stemmed from the ways colonial and nationalist paradigms produced hierarchies of relevance, elevating certain spaces as centers of progress while relegating others to the margins of history. Colonial officials and travelers, writing from Bombay, Calcutta, Cairo, or London, did not see the Gulf as a vibrant space of everyday life and interwoven communities, but merely as a strategic frontier within a larger imperial geography. The reports, travelogues, and correspondence reduced the region to its logistical and geopolitical functions: ports to be fortified, sea routes to be patrolled, rulers to be managed, and rival influences to be contained. In the writings, the Gulf appeared less as a living social landscape marked by movement, social life, adaptation, interaction, and more as a corridor of imperial rivalry and anxiety. Through such narratives, the region became a chessboard for imperial power politics, a space mapped and remapped by British, French, Ottoman, and later American official strategists, you call it. These imperial and strategic visions imposed boundaries, hierarchies, as I said, and categories of knowledge that would long outlast the powers themselves, shaping how the Gulf was imagined and represented in both administrative archives and modern scholarship. The British archives in particular teem with the language of strategy and surveillance, depicting the Gulf as a frontier of empire. The region was described, measured, mapped, yet rarely understood through the perspectives of its own people, who appeared as objects of policy rather than subjects of history. Absent from this record, from those archives, is the intellectual and social vitality of Gulf societies, the scholars, the merchants, sailors, pilgrims, mothers, divers, whose movements linked Basra, Baghdad, Cairo, Muscat, the Hijaz, Manama, Doha, and Bombay, and whose exchanges sustained interconnected zones and regions across the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. In these colonial depictions, the Gulf emerged not as a center of human connection and meaning, but as a geography to be controlled, a space of imperial design. Arab nationalist and reformist narratives that emerged from Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut often reproduced similar patterns of exclusion. They imagined the Arab region's modern awakening as radiating from the urban centers of the Eastern Mediterranean, while portraying the Gulf as peripheral, conservative, and untouched by reform and transformation. As I have noted in my work, and as my colleague Fahad Bishara has shown, the Gulf long remained at the margins of Arab and Middle Eastern historiography. Its history is repeatedly cast into the background by narratives centered on the Mediterranean and the Nile Valley. In contrast to these limiting geographies, the Gulf's historical horizons extend far beyond the conventional boundaries of what we know as the Arab region or what we define as the Middle East, reaching deep into the networks of the Indian Ocean. To understand the Gulf, therefore, is to study it not as a closed regional unit, but as a trans-regional crossroads shaped by overlapping circulation of peoples, capital, goods, and equally important ideas. While both empire and nationalism consigned the Gulf to the margins, whether by design or neglect or both, a new generation of historians, local and international, Arab and non-Arab alike, has begun to recover those overlooked histories and reassert the Gulf's centrality in the making of the modern world. This emerging body of scholarship reveals a region defined not by isolation, but by connection and by creativity. For example, Nelida Fukaro redefines the Gulf's urban history by dismantling myths of isolation and exceptionalism. She reveals the Gulf cities as dynamic, interconnected spaces shaped by labor, migration, and trans-regional exchange. My own research extends this vision both eastward and westward, situating the Gulf within a wider Indian Ocean and Mediterranean intellectual geography. By tracing connections that link Zanzibar, Oman, and Istanbul to North and East Africa, my work repositions the Gulf as part of a broader cross-regional network of reformist, national, and anti-colonial thought. My colleague Fahad Bishara, in turn, demonstrates through his work that the Gulf was integral to a vast littoral economy stretching from Basra to Bombay and Muscat to Zanzibar. Its merchants and sailors were cosmopolitan actors. I should have mentioned Kuwait as well. You know what I mean. Its merchants and sailors were cosmopolitan actors crossing all imperial boundaries. Bishara's work exposes the Gulf not as a periphery for empire, but as one of its most vibrant laboratories of interaction and exchange, situating the region's history not on land alone, but across the sea, within the wider currents of the Indian Ocean. So recent scholarship has illuminated shared horizons of sailors, merchants, reformers, scholars, thinkers, and politicians who saw the sea not as a barrier, but as a bridge. It has revealed the Gulf as part of a vast circulatory network, one where ideas, as I said, people and texts moved across imperial and national boundaries. Together, the insights of this new scholarship invite us to reconsider what has long been treated as peripheral, to recognize the Gulf as a center in its own right, shaped by its distinctive geography and networks of connection. And we have to remember that the marginalization of the Gulf in the historiography now is telling us less about the region itself and more about the limits of the narratives that sought to define and contain the Gulf. The rethinking of the Gulf's past finds its resonance in the present. Today, the region is engaged in an unprecedented project of historical recovery and self-definition. Across the Gulf, we see entire districts transformed into open-air museums. Archives once scattered or forgotten are being repatriated, catalogued, and opened. And new academic and cultural initiatives are positioning the Gulf not at the edges of a global scholarship, but at its very center. Gulf countries' national visions increasingly recognize that the future of sustainable development and the global relevance depends on placing academic institutions at the heart of national transformation. By embedding universities within broader strategies of economic diversification, innovation, and cultural preservation, these visions position knowledge production as a central pillar of nation building, linking it to social transformation, geopolitical influence, and soft power. Education and research institutions in the Gulf play a pivotal role in shaping how nations are perceived globally. The stronger and more dynamic their academic ecosystems, the greater their capacity to attract talent, foster partnerships, and generate the expertise that supports diplomatic and economic leadership. In this evolving landscape, universities are not merely sites of instruction, but spaces of critical thinking and the global leadership, where research informs policy, heritage, and tradition drive innovation, and new generations are prepared to engage thoughtfully with both regional challenges and the global conversations. What's now expected of Gulf academic institutions is the cultivation of intellectual depth and resilience, to create spaces capable of engaging complexity, nuance, and contradictions. This means fostering environments where the region's diverse social, economic, and cultural layers can meet in meaningful ways, and where scholarship captures rather than simplifies that multiplicity. Reclaiming the margins in the sense calls for institutions that are not merely celebratory, but interrogative, sites of sustained reflection that acknowledge the Gulf's deep entanglements with the wider world. For too long, as I mentioned earlier, the region's historical imagination was shaped by others, by imperial cartographers, colonial administrators, and nationalist historians. Today, Gulf universities have both the opportunity and the responsibility to write differently, to produce histories that illuminate the region's plurality and enduring global connections. Their evolving role is defined by a commitment to critical inquiry, intellectual openness, and curiosity, and by the ability to question the very frameworks of knowledge that have long structured their disciplines. The Doha Institute for Graduate Studies stands as a leading example of this vision, a space intentionally designed to nurture interdisciplinary dialogue, critical scholarship, and the reimagining of Arab thought within broader regional and global conversations. The task ultimately is to make Gulf institutions true laboratories of thought, places where ideas are tested, history is rewritten with a greater inclusivity, and knowledge produced in dialogue with their societies, the region, and the wider world. The transformation of knowledge production in the Gulf is not only an intellectual project, but also a historiographical one, an effort to rethink how history itself is written, whose voices are amplified, and which silences are allowed to persist. It involves recovering the experiences of those long excluded from dominant narratives and restoring their presence within the broader story of the region. As my colleague, also in the history program, Dr. Abdulrahman Ibrahim's work on marginalized communities in the Gulf demonstrates, such recovery unsettles inherited chronologies and categories, revealing new ways of understanding, belonging, and identity. Reclaiming the margins in this sense is a historiographical and scholarly endeavor, one that redefines both the sources and the subject of history and invites us to imagine a more inclusive and self-reflective future for Gulf and global scholarship. As this conference unfolds, let's keep in view what makes the Gulf such a compelling vantage point for thinking about the globe. Its significance lies not only in its strategic position, economic reach, and a growing role as a diplomatic and geopolitical crossroads, where global powers, regional aspiration, and transnational ideas continually intersect, but also in its ability to reveal the deep interconnections that have always bound societies, cultures, and regions together. This conference reminds us that the Gulf's history has always unfolded through layers of connection and exchange, revealing continuities that link past and present across different geographies. To study the Gulf, then, is to recognize that what we once called the margins have never been outside history. They are where history has always been made and where it continues to be rewritten. To think from the Gulf, thus, is to think globally, with depth, plurality, and a critical insight, true to the spirit of this gathering, with the title, The Gulf and the Globe. Thank you.